Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and with my last day on the APK test server before I have to go back to my own account and I don't get to keep all the stuff that I got on the APK test server like Tier 3 Apocalypse, I decided that it would be important to try and cover and give you guys all of the information that I've been able to gather so far on the 3 new CTPs. So for all of you out there that are going to get lucky gambling for them, or for those of you out there who are just going to keep gambling until you get them, you want to know what you're going to be getting. You want to know what you're going to be investing to get. And if in the future they release these CTPs in other ways, if we can obtain them via different methods, it's also an important thing to know. Now, what I'm going to tell you guys obviously is just a, small amount of time that one person had to test them. So I will admit that my results I don't think are conclusive, and I don't stand behind my conclusions that I make of these CTPs in terms of how good they are. I don't think I can say, with 100% certainty that these CTPs are this or that. And it took a long time for it took months for people to figure out other CTPs in the past. So this is no different. And I'm actually going to need people in the community to test it for us to finally figure things out. But I have some answers figured out that I can answer, and so you can get an idea of what these CTPs are good for, and maybe what they're not so good for, and maybe how they match up against other CTPs and obelisks. It's actually interesting for obelisks. But before we get into that, just a quick pause on that. I have to give a huge shout out to everyone in the community. If you go over to Twitter, or if you went to my YouTube community page, or if you're on Discord, you saw that I sent out a message, hashtag scrap the cap, hashtag MFF 2019. I'm doing my best here to push the Marvel Future Fight devs to raise the X-Men material cap, and you all in the community have responded amazingly. This post has almost 500 likes in 5 hours, over 200 retweets, and I know this might seem to some of you guys that it's just me trying to get influence for myself, or me trying to look cool on social media. Look guys, I got 500 likes. No, I don't really care. I don't care about the likes, but you know who does care about the likes? Marvel Future Fight. You know who else cares about the likes? Netmarble. You know who else cares about the likes? Disney and Marvel, because that is going to reflect on them. And if something starts to become trending, and you know what? We're actually not that far from it being trending. There's probably been over 100, maybe 150, maybe 200 different tweets and retweets and replies to tweets using these hashtags. That starts to add up. And then people who don't even play this game start paying attention because they go over to what's trending, and that's trending. Like, why is this trending in Toronto? Okay, let's take a look. And then they read about it. So you never know what could happen. And it's always good to let the developers know when things need to change. And this absolutely needs to change. So I just wanted to send a big thank you out to everybody who's been just helping in any way, shape, or form. Whether you're creating a Twitter account to tweet it out, whether you're liking something, you're retweeting something, whether you're just talking about it. I really appreciate that, and thank you very much. And hopefully we can get some change. Now, you're going to need a lot of change. You're going to need dollars, possibly hundreds of dollars to get these CTPs. And there's aptly named, it's the CTP of Greed. We've also got the CTP of Judgment, and then we've also got the CTP of Insight. So what do these 3 CTPs do? Well, we'll start with the absolute easiest one right here. This is the CTP of Insight. It looks like a plunger or some kind of toy, and it gives you max HP, all defense, which seems to be PvP oriented, and then it has an interesting proc, and the proc happens every 7 seconds, and the proc activates with a 10% chance when you're attacking. It applies to all allies, doesn't just apply to you, and it increases the damage dealt to superhero types by 20% and supervillain types by 20%. Now, I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to test it out in the video because it just takes too long to load everything up, but I will say that you can go on Twitch and you can see the testing for all of these CTPs. I even labeled the titles of the videos CTP testing, so you can go and watch that if you want to see the breakdown. Everything I'm telling you is based off what I tested on Twitch. There were hundreds of people there that can verify that I tested these things, and I also have this snazzy Excel spreadsheet. So what did I find with the CTP of Insight, which is the CTP that I just showed you that Enchantress has? Well, I tested Enchantress with and without the CTP of Insight as a support for Ghost in ABX. So Enchantress wasn't attacking, Enchantress wasn't striking for Ghost, but Enchantress was on the team. And I could see that the CTP of Insight icon was there for Ghost. So that means that even though the CTP is equipped on this character, if she's on the team, like let's say I bring this team into World Boss or Shadowland or Alliance Battle, all three of these characters will have the Ctp of Insight's proc. They won't gain the all defense, they won't gain the max HP, but they will gain the proc effect, and it will activate, you know, with a 5-second timer on a 7-second cooldown every time you have, you know, with a 10% chance every time you attack. Now, I don't know if it gets buffed. I don't know if the Ctp of Insight gets buffed with Captain Marvel's Tier 2 passive buff, the Carol Core passive. I didn't test that out. But the interesting thing is, this 20% damage buff to superheroes and villains, this activates whether the character is on the team or whether they're a World Boss Striker. I tested it out as a World Boss Striker, and it works. So that seems really OP. However, that last line of text there, that yellow text, duplicate coverage of the CTP's overall effect on team members is not allowed. What that means is, if you have multiple CTPs of Insight, you're a big juicy whale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 CTPs of Insight. If you give them to 5 World Boss Strikers and you put them all on the team, you don't get 100% increased damage dealt to superheroes and supervillains. You only get 1 proc, you only get 1 buff, you only get that 20%. So, is it good to have 1 CTP of Insight? Hell yeah, it is good. It's not amazing. It's not going to destroy the game. It's not going to make everything super easy. I mean, Marvel Future Fight's already a really easy game. But is this going to make the game super easy mode? No. Is it going to have some impact on ABX scores and World Boss Ultimate clears? Yes. Is it going to have an insane impact, like, you know, plus 1,000,000 points in ABX? No, it's not going to be like plus 1,000,000. The max percentage is only 20%. That's half of the buff that a character like Valkyrie or Shuri adds with their passive. So think about that. You go over to Shuri, and you see that she adds, well, we gotta go find Shuri first, because she's never here when we need her. Okay, Valkyrie, sure, Valkyrie. You go over to Valkyrie, she is adding 45% buff. So it's less than half, it's 20%. And it's not active all the time. It's active for 5 seconds every 7 seconds. So every 7 seconds, you're losing at least 2 seconds. So if you're losing 2 seconds, you know, that adds up. So for those of you wondering for ABX, this is only going to be active for 2 minutes and 10 seconds of the fight. It's not going to be the first 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Obviously, it's 5 seconds from beginning to end. But because you're missing at least 2 seconds every 7 seconds, and you have 180 seconds or 3 minutes, you're going to be losing about 33%, or 33% of the time, 30% of the time, 1/3 of the time, you won't have the buff active. So it's half as good, less than half as good as the Valkyrie buff, and it's only active for about 60-65% of the time. It also works in World Boss, which is nice. I don't think this is going to be game-changing. I don't think you're going to need more than 2 or 3 per account. It's going to be a CTP that, you know, it has its uses, absolutely, but it's not something you're going to be drooling over to get as many on your hands as you can. It's not energy, it's not rage, it's not destruction, it's not even authority. Honestly, this is more like the egg. You want a couple of them, you want to crack a few eggs, but you don't want to have a whole basket of eggs. Okay? So that's the first CTP. The second CTP we're going to talk about is one... Whoop, I keep going back to Iceman. The second CTP that we're going to talk about is one that I think a lot of people have been curious about. The Elemental CTP. We finally have an Elemental CTP, guys. What does it give? Let's check it out. All attack. That's kind of nice. Chain hit damage dealt. Interesting. And then a 10% chance when you attack. It decreases the enemy's resistances by 30%. It does work on World Boss. Yes, it does. And it gives a 200% damage increase to all elemental damage. A 200% elemental damage increase. That's a lot. Okay, so what does the Ctp of Judgment do? Well, I tested the Ctp of Judgment several times with several characters using different CTPs and an obelisk as a comparison. So check it out. We tested Thor. This is all against Ebony stage 37 and Thanos stage 15. Okay, and this is without strikers, with no team up, just the character as is, no leadership, nothing. So Thor was doing a lot more damage with the Ctp of Rage. So for Thor, at least, or for characters that have some elemental buffs, because Thor gives himself some lightning damage, it seems that Judgment is not as good as Rage. So I think that's going to, you know, really be important for some people who have already gambled for CTPs of Rage. they want to know if the CTP of Judgment is going to be just straight up better. I don't think it's better than Rage, personally, for pretty much every character. Is it better than Energy? So I think that also depends on the character. So I think it's a pretty difficult question to answer just right off the top of your head. But if you think about the way that you play Psylocke, Psylocke has a lot of hits, especially when you combo her new 4th skill, where she backflips in the air, and then her 5th skill. There's tons of hits, tons of chain hit damage. Now, there is chain hit damage on this CTP, but it just doesn't seem to do as much for Psylocke. So as you can see from the chart, Psylocke actually was faster, and I did multiple tests again. You can see it all on Twitch. Psylocke was faster with Energy than Judgment. It's not a lot faster, but you can say that Judgment is about as good as Energy, maybe a little bit worse. Now, here's where it gets interesting. For Scarlet Witch, it seemed that the CTP of Judgment was better than the CTP of Energy. Now, that could be because Scarlet Witch doesn't have as many hits on her skills, so she doesn't take advantage of the chain hit damage as much. It could be because Scarlet Witch has a harder time being consistent with her damage proc and landing it at that exact moment, because the advantage of the CTP of Judgment is that it activates for the full 5 seconds. During that 5-second activation, your elemental damage is buffed. It's like a CTP of Rage. The buff lasts for the whole time. It doesn't just last for the first hit or for the first skill. So that could be why Scarlet Witch seems to be better with a CTP of Judgment than a CTP of Energy, but it's minor. It's not a huge jump here. This is 20 plus seconds. That's a big deal. This is like less than 10 seconds. That's not something to cry too much about. And then we have a really, really interesting one here. This is Iceman. Iceman actually performed better with a double cold damage, 200% damage proc, than he did with an Energy CTP. Now, it's very difficult. It might be harder to roll this proc than to gamble for this Energy CTP, but I did want to point that out. But he did even better with this Judgment CTP. Now, Iceman is an interesting character because he does have a lot of hits, but he also does a lot of damage with individual attacks, but Iceman doesn't have any cold damage self-buffs. So this is something that actually has been said on the Reddit recently, and it could be true. I can't confirm it, but it could be true. Characters that don't naturally have elemental buffs, elemental characters that don't naturally have elemental buffs, could benefit more from the CTP of Judgment because they're going from 0 to 200 rather than going from whatever to whatever. So in the case of a character like, you know, Luna Snow, for example, she does have 30% cold damage. So she might not get as much value out of the CTP of Judgment as a character who uses elemental attacks, but, you know, doesn't have any elemental buffs to their attacks. So you could take another character that, let's say, buffs their own damage via their leadership. So Human Torch, let's say, he gives himself 25% fire damage from here. I think he also has fire damage on his No, he doesn't. Okay, but you get what I'm sort of saying. So characters that can buff their own elemental damage through their leadership or through their passive effects, maybe someone like Ghost Panther, might not benefit as much from a CTP of Judgment, whereas a character who doesn't have any elemental self buffs, like Cyclops, he only has 10% fire damage here, they might benefit more from the CTP of Judgment, and that's sort of what Iceman sort of seemed to do. Now, is the CTP of Judgment going to be better than every other CTP? No, I still think that overall the CTP of Judgment is going to be worse than the CTP of Rage for most instances. It's just going to matter how easy it is to get a CTP of Judgment versus a CTP of Rage. But I think the Judgment could give serious competition to the CTP of Energy and other CTPs and or obelisks. So that is an interesting thing to consider. The last CTP, possibly the most hilariously named, is the CTP of Rage. And this one is interesting because it's so oddly built. It's quirky. It's got guard break immunity, which is very PvP important. It's got ignore dodge, which is also really good for PvP. And then it has a self-heal, a 10-second recovery, or a 10% recovery, excuse me. So it heals you. That's weird. And then, on top of that, it has a buff. It has a 100% increase to damage dealt against combat and blast types, or speed and universal types. Very, very weird CTP. And then it says at the bottom, in even more confusing fashion, the effect of increasing damage is increasing and activated. I have no idea what that means, so I had to test it a whole bunch of times. And here's what I found out. The 12-second cooldown, the cooldown time 12 seconds, is not applying to the buff, to that 100% increase. It only applies to the 100% increase every 3 procs. It's really weird and it's confusing. So basically, the very first time you activate, or the very first time you start the fight, the Ctp of Greed automatically activates. You guys notice there's no activation rate. There's no chance to activate when you attack. It just happens automatically. It automatically activates, and it gives you the buff, and it gives you the heal. Then, 12 seconds later, it gives you the heal again. So every 12 seconds, it's going to give you the heal, whether you need it or not. So if you take any damage, it'll heal you for 10%. If you don't have 10% of your HP gone, it'll heal you for whatever is left. Now, the buff, the 100% increase to damage dealt, that one does something even weirder. So it activates for 5 seconds at the very beginning of the fight, and then it goes away. It doesn't activate for like 10 seconds or 12 seconds, and then it activates, and then it activates, and then it activates, and then it does the same thing again. So it's got a very, very strange pattern where basically it activates once, it waits 12 seconds, and then it will activate with a 2-second gap in between, or a 1-second gap in between. It will activate 3 times, like a regular 7-second damage proc, like a Ctp of Energy or whatever. It will activate 3 times normally with a very short cooldown, and then it will go back to that 12-second cooldown. And then it will repeat that process again and again and again. So you technically have 2 different procs working simultaneously. You have the heal, the recovery, that just keeps happening every 12 seconds. So it happens 5 times per minute. And that's just like clockwork. It's always every 12 seconds. It doesn't change. It doesn't get faster. It doesn't get slower. The buff, the 150% damage, that one appears to, you know, activate once and then wait, and then activate, wait, activate, wait, activate, and then wait a long time, and then activate, 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 and then wait a long time. Very, very strange. I honestly cannot make a lot of sense of it. I did a lot of testing with it. I was still confused. I wish Marvel Future Fight would give us a little bit more information on it, but we might have to just test it ourselves. From what I gathered, Quicksilver, again, no leadership, just the Ctp of Greed, was doing stage 40 Corvus faster with a Greed Ctp than with an Energy Ctp. So it at least for Quicksilver, was as good, if not better, than an Energy Ctp. And that's a pretty big deal because you're losing the crit damage, you're losing the chain hit damage, and you're losing the regular damage proc, and it's still faster. So that's a pretty serious buff. Don't know if it's better than a Rage Ctp. Again, I kind of doubt it, but it's got advantages that the Rage Ctp doesn't have. It's got a heal, it's got ignore dodge, and most importantly, it has guard break immunity. So this could be a very, very good sort of PvP ABX Ctp. Imagine someone like Thanos, who absolutely needs guard break immunity, but he also has this buff, this damage buff that he can use for ABX against the Frost Beast, but he also has the ignore dodge to use against PvP to hit Quicksilver and Ant-Man. How nasty, how amazing is that? What about Captain Marvel right here? Right? Could be a two-way thing. Now, I don't know how good it's going to be in ABX. I haven't tested it out. I'm just sort of spitballing. I'm sort of theorizing here. But that is something that I wanted to bring to people's attention because it could be that way. Because it's really got, you know, 3 stats that are very PvP oriented: ignore, dodge, guard, break, heal. And then it has 1 stat at the bottom that's very PvE oriented. But it also has some value for PvP because it gives you the flexibility of Combat Blast Speed Universal, which covers all characters. So you'll have a damage buff against any PvP opponent that you face. So even if you're a Blast type and you don't have that type advantage against Jean Grey, you can do more damage to her. You can have that damage spike. Is that going to be better than a Ctp of Energy or a Ctp of Destruction? I don't know. We'll have to see in testing more often, with more testing in the near future. So yeah, from what I can tell, from the information I've gathered, the Ctp, this one is pretty good, not game-breaking. This one is good, but again, not game-breaking. This one is just a big question mark. I have no idea. It might be game-breaking. It might be pretty good. It's probably not going to be bad, but it's definitely confusing. So gamble with caution. I don't know how good this one is. So hopefully this has helped you guys out. Hopefully this has shed a little bit more light on the Ctp sort of stats and abilities and functions, especially for Insight. You guys now know that it works with supports in both the team slot, so it works like this, but it also works as a world boss striker support. let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys want to see next. Hopefully, I will see you guys tonight, later, at around midnight, 1 a.m. for the update to be live. We're going to dive right in on Twitch on my real account, on my main account, finally. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.